A 17-year-old girl left the cafe where she was working part-time on the weekend and disappeared without a trace. The police began to find disturbing evidence that led them to believe that something really bad had happened to the girl. From the first days, the case became an important one. Message topic: in Sweden, more than 1,000 people joined the search, making it the largest in the country's history. When the sad truth came to light, people were shocked how something like this could happen. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998. She was born in the Swedish town of Sogt. It was a quiet and peaceful place. She lived there with her parents and her older sister. Lisa was a friendly, positive, and determined person. Even before she finished school, she decided to move to Australia and train as an architect. In addition, she and her parents often traveled and saw many other countries. The girl was also very independent. Even as a teenager, she tried to take various part-time jobs to earn her own money. Before the summer of 2015, when Lisa was 17 years old, she got her first real job at a coffee shop that was about 40 minutes away from her home. In the first few weeks, her parents took her there by car, but soon her father bought her a motor scooter. Lisa had a driving license for it because she couldn't get a car license until she was 18. The girl was happy about this gift because she wanted to drive to work independently. However, her father accompanied her for a few weeks because Lisa had almost no experience with driving in traffic. She only worked on the weekends, and her father drove with her every morning and evening until June 7th. The girl drove to the cafe alone on her scooter for the first time. Around midday, her parents decided to go to her workplace to get something to eat and to check on their daughter. The cafe was very busy that day, and Lisa was under time pressure, so she made a quick lunch break, had a snack with her parents, and they drove home. At 6:23 p.m., Lisa texted her father that she was going home now, but only 3 minutes later, he received a call from her phone. The man picked up the phone, but no one answered him. He heard some voices in the background and thought that Lisa had accidentally pressed the call. It seemed to the father as if his daughter was talking to her colleagues. He also heard a car door slamming. The man said her name a few more times before he ended the call and waited for her to come home. An hour had passed since then, and the girl's parents were starting to get worried. Lisa should have been home long ago. Her father immediately thought that something might have happened to her on the way. It was the first time she was riding the scooter alone, and the man was very worried about her safety. He tried to call her several times, but Lisa's phone was switched off. After waiting a few minutes, the father decided to drive towards her. The girl had to take the shortest route, and the man hoped to meet her on the way. The father feared that his daughter might have had an accident and therefore drove at low speed and looked around on the road, but Lisa was nowhere to be found. The man reached the coffee shop without finding his daughter. As he approached her workplace, he saw Lisa's scooter parked in front of the building. At this point, the man panicked because he couldn't find his daughter on the entire route. When he saw her scooter, he immediately calmed down. The father thought that the girl was with him for some reason, but there was no one in the company, and the man noticed something else. The keys to the scooter were in the ignition, and Lisa's helmet wasn't on, which finally gave him the idea that something bad had happened to the girl. They left the keys in the scooter and left it unattended in a parking lot. In the meantime, Lisa's mother called the owner of the coffee shop in the hope that she could shed some light on the girl's disappearance, but the woman claimed she had no idea where she might have gone. At around 6 o'clock in the evening, she called her employees, who told her that they were closing the place. After the call from Lisa's mother, the coffee owner immediately got in her car and drove there. On the way, she called her acquaintances who lived near the bar and asked them to help with the search. 4 people complied with this request. When the coffee owner arrived on site, she and the girl's father started both the bar itself, and their last hope was that, for some reason, Lisa had decided not to go home with the scooter, but to take the bus home. They asked about the timetable, and the girl's mother and her older sister went to the bus stop in their town. Unfortunately, this was confirmed. This version is not Lisa was not on the bus. The family immediately contacted the police. At this point, It was almost 10 o'clock in the evening, and it was getting dark outside. The police immediately began a large veranda. The fact that the girl's scooter, with the key, was parked in the parking lot made them suspect that the girl might have been kidnapped. Such cases are quite rare in Sweden and even rarer in this remote provincial region. So the officers immediately sent several teams with dogs to search for her, and other police officers began searching every house in the area. Her classmates and friends soon found out about Lisa's disappearance. They spread the information about her disappearance on social networks in the hope that witnesses could be found. The search for the girl continued throughout the night, but they brought no results. On Monday, the police knew that Lisa was missing and called on them to give her any useful information. At about the same time, the officers were approached by a man who had discovered a motorcycle glove in a barn directly above the coffee on his way to work. The police had the barn in the evening of the girl's disappearance, but did not notice the glove there. It was shown to Lisa's parents, and they confirmed that the glove was really hers. This strengthened the kidnapping theory, and the police made additional resources available for the search. In the meantime, the news of the girl's disappearance had spread throughout the neighborhood, and hundreds of volunteers took part in the search. On Tuesday, police received several more disturbing tips. Volunteers who searched the area along a country road that begins just a few hundred meters from the cafe found a cell phone case, a receipt, a ticket, and a smashed smartphone display. The investigators immediately determined that all of these items belonged to Lisa and concentrated their search in this area. They soon found additional pieces of the smashed smartphone, Lisa's ID card, and several other receipts. All of these items were scattered on the same country road. After the discovery of this evidence, police had little doubt that Lisa had been the victim of a kidnapping. They used all available forces to search for her, and every day more and more concerned people joined in. The case became a big issue throughout Sweden, and hundreds of volunteers traveled from the whole country to take part in the search. A voluntary organization that specialized in the search for missing people also took part, making it the largest search operation in the country's history. In total, more than 1,000 people took part in the search. The police also received numerous calls with possible clues. A woman said she had gone jogging the day before Lisa disappeared. She was stopped in the middle of the street by a man who was standing next to his car. He spoke to her in English and asked her for directions to a city she had never heard of. She showed him the direction on Google Maps, but then the man asked her to get into his car and show him the route on his sat-nav. Of course, the woman viewed such a request with great suspicion and refused, whereupon she moved on. In her conversation with the police, she noticed an interesting detail. She thought she had seen the man before among the workers who were carrying out repairs in the bar opposite the coffee shop, including Lisa's colleagues. They said something interesting. On the day of Lisa's disappearance, one of the waitresses noticed two men standing across the street from the cafe and looking in the direction of the restaurant. She didn't think much of it, but after Lisa's disappearance, she decided to report her observation to the police. The next morning, a Wednesday, the girl's father and his acquaintances searched the country road on which her belongings were found. After walking a little further, he discovered further disturbing finds: Lisa's scooter license and her house keys. Everything looked as if Lisa had been driven down this road in the direction away from the cafe, and the kidnapper had dropped her belongings there. Police officers and volunteers did everything they could to continue searching the area, but no further items could be found. That same evening, a friend of Lisa's father drove past the cafe on the way home from the search. He noticed that the police tape was there at the barn where the girl's glove had been found. The man decided to go in there and take a flashlight with him, as it was already dark outside. He walked around the room for a few minutes until something shiny on the floor caught his attention. As he approached, he saw the woman's earring and a second earring nearby. The man informed the police. They showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. They confirmed that the jewelry belonged to their daughter. The police locked the barn again and searched it more thoroughly. The lead investigator later said that on the first day of the search for Lisa, the focus was on finding the girl herself and therefore only examined the barn superficially. This meant that they might have overlooked small items such as earrings. This time, however, many forensic experts were called in. During the second search, they discovered a very unusual piece of evidence. In one of the partitions, the police found human feces. At first glance, one might think that this has nothing to do with the case. However, criminologists have a reasonable explanation for this. They say that criminals produce a large amount of adrenaline when committing serious crimes, so they often feel the need. For example, it is common for a murderer to wet himself before or during the crime. Lisa's glove and earrings were found in the barn. It was clear to the police that if she had actually been kidnapped, the perpetrator had dragged her into this very room. Therefore, they did not rule out that the person could not hold back under the influence of adrenaline and had defecated, and the feces were handed over to experts for DNA analysis. On Friday, the search area was expanded, and the volunteers reached a farm about 3 kilometers away from the cafe around a complex with several large buildings where many people worked. The members of the search team decided to look at all the buildings, but as soon as they arrived on the site, they were approached by 2 men. They didn't know Swedish and only spoke English. One of them said the police had already inspected the farm, but the head of the search team had doubts about this information. He was of the opinion that he would have known about it in this case and ordered the search to continue. The 2 men walked around the property for a while and observed the volunteers before they left again. About an hour later, the members of the search team found a pile of branches behind the barn, under which they found a motorcycle helmet, a jacket, and headphones. Police officers immediately arrived at the scene and confirmed that all of these items belonged to Lisa. They sent forensic officers to the scene yard to search it more thoroughly and also heard the story of the 2 strangers who had tried to stop the volunteers from looking around the yard. The police remembered a report from a woman who had encountered a suspicious man who spoke English, and they already had an idea who it was. In the first few days of the search, houses near the cafes were searched, and in one of the houses lived 2 brothers from Leetown and the wife of one of the 2. Before we continue with the rest of the story, I would like to remind you that if you are not subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe now and like the video so that I have the energy to publish new videos. Thank you. All 3 could not speak Swedish and communicated in English. They were the only people in a radius of several kilometers who did not speak the local language. Police had other evidence that made them suspicious. The brothers worked in the barn opposite the cafe and on the farm where Lisa's helmet was found. They were very familiar with these buildings and the surrounding area, and the country road along which many of the girls' belongings were found led to their house. Since the police had no other suspects, they decided to interrogate them first. They set off to take them to the police station. The forensic officers met with volunteers at the farmer's house. They continued to look at the yard. An old trailer caught their attention. It was surrounded by tall grass and looked like it hadn't been used in years. Near the door, the vegetation was wrinkled as if something had recently been there, and part of the grass had been caught by the door, which meant that someone had recently opened it. When the forensic scientists opened the door, they were immediately greeted by a strong smell of corpses. Inside the trailer, there were lockers for clothing. Apparently, it was previously used as a changing room for the workers. All but one of these lockers were locked, and the experts thought that Lisa's body was in one of these lockers. They began to open them one by one, but quickly discovered that the girl's body was in the open locker behind a pile of old clothes and rags. Due to the small size of the space to place its victim there was a rope around Lisa's neck and a large amount of tape on her head. The medical examiners determined that Lisa died from strangulation. They found no signs of mistreatment. All her clothing was handed over to the experts. Meanwhile, the news of the body's discovery spread throughout the country. All week, the news of the kidnapping of a 17-year-old girl was the most important news in Sweden, and when her body was found and the public found out that Lisa had been brutally murdered, the case went viral. Crimes of this kind were extremely rare in Sweden, and people were shocked that someone could commit such an atrocity. On the same day that the girl's body was found, something unusual and very scary happened. YouTube users found a video that was published 13 days before the murder. The title of the video was the number 13, and the video itself was a countdown timer. The most disturbing thing was the name of the channel that published the video. It was Lisa Holm. The information about this video immediately went viral, and many people were shocked by such a series of coincidences. Some believed that a user had predicted the murder, but in reality, everything turned out to be much simpler. Apparently, someone simply saw the name of the channel in the video after discovering the girl's body and changed it. Either this person wanted to spread another conspiracy theory or just make a cruel joke. In the meantime, the police were tasked with finding the murderer as quickly as possible. At the time of Lisa's discovery, the investigators already had 2 brothers and a woman taken to the police station, and all 3 denied involvement. They said they were at home at the time of the kidnapping and confirmed each other's alibis after saying they were asleep. The older brother was in his room, his wife was cooking dinner, while the youngest brother was at the computer. The older brother, named Nereus, added that he woke up around 8 o'clock in the evening and went to a gas station where he bought cigarettes. The police didn't believe the alibis. All 3 could protect each other. By taking samples from them, the investigators still didn't have a single piece of evidence that would have linked them to the murder. But it didn't take long for the forensic scientists to work in the barn and on the farm and use all available resources. In the barn opposite the coffee shop, there was something like a small office cubicle. It had a large window that looked directly onto the coffee shop. When examining this room, the experts found 15 different traces of male bodily fluids on the walls and on the floor near this window. It looked as if a man had stood there and watched the female employees of the restaurant, including Lisa, and he touched himself. These male body fluid samples were immediately sent to the laboratory where a DNA profile was created in a very short time. These 15 male body fluid traces completely matched the DNA of Nereus, the older brother. The same applies to the feces that were found in the barn. They also belonged to him. In the room next to the office where cow's milk used to be stored, the forensic experts discovered a pipe that was sticking out 2 meters out of the ground and was covered with a thick layer of dust except for a narrow strip. The size of this strip matched the rope wrapped around Lisa's neck. Traces of blood were also found on this pipe. A DNA analysis showed that it belonged to Nereus. The same rope was also found on the ground under the pipe. The forensic scientists examined it and identified 2 DNA profiles, that of Lisa and that of Nereus. For the police, this was the first serious indication that the man had definitely interacted with the rope that had killed the girl. Among other things, Lisa's hair was found on the floor of this room. Another important piece of evidence came from her jacket, on which DNA traces of Nereus were also found. Based on the evidence available, the police came to the conclusion that she had been killed there, and they got a rough idea of what happened. In their opinion, Nereus had been watching the coffee shop for some time, and when Lisa was alone in the parking lot, he drove to her. According to the woman's statement, the man could have asked Lisa to show him the way to a certain town, whereupon Nereus could have asked her to get into his car to give directions. Since Lisa was a good-natured and helpful person, she could have agreed. As soon as the girl was in the car, the perpetrator taped her mouth shut and drove to the barn across the street. There, he put a rope around the girl's neck and hung her from the pipe. According to experts, this sight excited the man so much that he threw himself on the ground with adrenaline. He then put Lisa's body in the car and drove to the farm. On the way there, he threw her belongings out the window and hid the body in a locker in the trailer, covering it with old clothes lying around. All this took the perpetrator less than an hour from the time of the kidnapping. Despite all the evidence available, Nereus continued to insist on his innocence. His wife and younger brother had to be released because there was nothing against them. After they were released, they left Sweden almost immediately and returned to Lithuania. The preparations for the trial were very intensive. Nereus said he had worked in this barn for a long time. His DNA could have gotten there. He also had alibis that came from his wife and brother, although these 2 sources were highly questionable. This would definitely work in his favor in court. On the other hand, the presence of Nereus' DNA on the victim's clothing could only be explained by the fact that he had touched them. The police also found witnesses who had seen his car directly. According to them, they had seen the vehicle near the cafe before and after Lisa's kidnapping and had driven along the road between the cafe and the farm several times, precisely at the time when Nereus was supposedly sleeping in his house. In the months following the discovery, experts continued to examine the evidence using state-of-the-art laboratories. Finally, they were able to find traces of Nereus DNA on almost all of Lisa's clothes, including on the inside of her underwear. While the whole country was watching the case, investigators continued to look for other useful evidence that could affect the trial. They even traveled to Leetown to speak to the suspect's wife and brother again. The woman kept insisting that he didn't leave the house between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., but when it was the younger brother's turn, he got it. The police suddenly did what they wanted. After the man was presented with all the evidence against his brother and described in detail what he had done to the 17-year-old girl, the man decided to confess everything. He stated that Nereus was actually not at home that night and only came back at 8:30 p.m. He was completely dirty and immediately threw all his clothes into the washing machine. When the police started searching all the residents and reached their house, Nereus whispered to his brother and told him that he was home at that time. He later explained this, saying Nereus feared that he would be blamed for someone else's crime because he was an immigrant and had no alibi for the time of the kidnapping. The younger brother really believed that his brother had nothing to do with the murder, but after he looked at all the evidence, he realized that he was wrong. Lisa's funeral didn't take place until a month after her murder. The church in which it took place only had room for 130 people, but there were many more people who wanted to say goodbye to the girl. Organizers decided to set up benches and large screens outside so everyone could watch the ceremony. The trial began 4 months after the murder. The case had caught the attention of all of Sweden, so everyone involved was under a lot of pressure. None of them had the right to make a mistake. Nereus' lawyer insisted that his client's DNA could have gotten on the victim's clothing because he worked in the barn. The prosecution, however, pointed out that this theory made no sense, especially in the case of Lisa's underwear. The only way the suspect's DNA got there was that he had touched the victim's underwear. Many other understandable excuses were not heard from Nereus. His lawyer only tried to put forward the theory that the real murderer was the younger brother, who took several DNA samples from Nereus and found them on the victim's body and at the crime scene. However, he could not explain the physical possibility of such DNA manipulation. The trial ended after a month, and Nereus was found guilty of murder. The man was sentenced to life imprisonment in a high-security prison that corresponds to a nice 3-star hotel. His lawyer tried to appeal against that judgment, but the appeal was rejected. At the beginning of 2017, Nereus himself requested his deportation and transfer to a prison in his home country. The reasons for this decision are not known. Lithuanian prisons are very different from Swedish prisons, and for the worse. However, the court decided to accept his request. After all, it costs the Swedish taxpayer several $100s per day to provide comfortable prison conditions for each offender. Later that same year, his intentions became obvious. He appealed to a Lithuanian court, and his sentence was reduced from life imprisonment to 15 years. However, the murderer's joy was short-lived. A few weeks later, the appeal court overturned the sentence, and Nereus was again forced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Only now, he had no chance to return to the comfort of his Swedish cell. 5 years later, in August 2022, Nereus was confronted with another disadvantage of the Lithuanian prison. While the prisoners were being moved to another building, one of them attacked the man with a knife. Nereus suffered severe cuts and died on the way to the hospital. As for his wife, her involvement is still not completely ruled out. The police noted that the woman's direct involvement in the kidnapping or murder is practically impossible since experts in this case have her DNA. However, it cannot be ruled out that she knew about her husband's crime and helped him escape justice by giving a false alibi. Nereus' younger brother also raises questions. The cafe's employees said they had seen 2 men standing in front of the barn and watching them. Since one of them was most likely Nereus himself, the second must have been his brother. But the man's DNA was not found in the barn itself or on Lisa's clothing, which makes his involvement in the murder unlikely. He and his older brother observed the young female employees and even discussed some lewd things, but only Nereus dared to commit such atrocities.